A silent rider buys a mother and child, unaware that she would heal his heart. I ain't saying nothin'. Just don't send me back. The wind tore through the barren plain, dry and merciless, whipping dust into swirling ghosts that danced across the hard-packed earth. Silas sat hunched on his porch, the familiar creak of floorboards a mournful song beneath his weight. His homestead, a collection of roughly hewn logs and determination, felt like an extension of his own reclusive soul, isolated, silent, enduring. He was a man carved from the land itself, broad-shouldered, weathered, his hands calloused from years of solitary labor. The pale winter sun offered little warmth, merely illuminating the vastness, the empty horizon that mirrored the void within him. He chopped wood deep into the night, the rhythmic thud of the axe against oak a dull echo of his own splitting guilt, the memory of loss a constant ache. His eyes, tired and sunken, had seen too much, held too many unspoken sorrows. He was emotionally numb, a rigid sentinel against the world, content in his solitude, or so he told himself. The only sounds that broke the ceaseless wind were the distant howl of a coyote and the clinking metal of a tin cup as he set it down. He lived by routine, a quiet existence defined by necessity and a profound absence. His past was a heavy blanket he pulled tightly around himself, concealing the trembling sorrow beneath. He didn't know it yet, but his first true home was right in front of him, hidden just beyond the edge of his awareness, about to arrive in the most unexpected way. The dust on his boots was thick, ancient, much like the grief that clung to him, heavy and unmoving. He had built this life, or what was left of it, piece by desolate piece, brick by bitter brick, after the world had taken everything that truly mattered. The silence here was not peaceful. It was a vast, echoing chamber for regrets. The town, when Silas rode in, was a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds that grated on his nerves. Boisterous laughter, the clatter of wagons, the harsh bark of a man selling dreams and desperation. He usually avoided it, preferring the honest company of the wind. But a rare supply run was needed. That was when he saw her. She stood in the frost, coatless, a child clutching her ragged skirt. Her shoulders were weary, her face smudged with dirt, but her gaze, though lowered, held a quiet dignity. The auctioneer, Bartholomew Crumpler, a man whose greed was etched into every sneering line of his face, was shouting, his voice thick with contempt. He spoke of debts, of broken promises, of the woman and child as mere chattel. Silas's blood ran cold. A memory, raw and stinging, flickered behind his eyes, a small hand, a lost face. He had lost his own family to the harshness of this land, to the uncaring indifference of circumstance. His heart, long a stony fortress, a solid wall, unexpectedly lurched. He hesitated, a tremor of an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He saw her flinch as Crumpler's voice grew louder, more mocking. The child, a small girl with wide, frightened eyes, buried her face in the woman's hip. Silas felt a strange, unfamiliar tug, a compulsion that went against every fiber of his reclusive being. He had no need for a woman or a child. He had no room for them in his stark, unforgiving life. Yet, as the bidding commenced, a guttural sound from the crowd, Silas found himself stepping forward. His hand, heavy and deliberate, went to his coin pouch. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hand, his gaze fixed on the woman, not the auctioneer.
$50.
Crumpler bellowed, a cruel laugh escaping his lips. Silas did not waver. He simply raised his hand again, his voice, when it came, a low rumble, barely audible above the din. 100, the crowd hushed. Crumpler's face twisted in surprise, then scorn. Sold. To the silent rider, he sneered. Silas nodded curtly, already moving towards them. He didn't know what he had done, only that he couldn't let them be bought by anyone else. He had acted against his nature, a quiet eruption of protectiveness he hadn't known he still possessed. Elara, the woman, looked at him with suspicion, her eyes, though exhausted, sharp and wary. She didn't speak, nor did her child, Lily, who clung tighter. The silent man, Silas, offered no explanation, merely a curt gesture for them to follow. The journey back to his homestead was long and silent, punctuated only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the biting wind that seemed to mock their forced togetherness. Alara kept her distance, her gaze sweeping over the desolate landscape, the vast, unforgiving expanse that would now be her home. She watched Silas, her mind wary, searching for any sign of the intentions of this quiet man who had bought them. He said nothing, his face a stoic mask, his broad-shouldered back to them as he drove. He didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their presence beyond the necessary movements of the horses and wagon. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions, with deep-seated mistrust on her part, and a profound awkwardness on his. When they arrived, the homestead, though solid, felt bleak. A wooden door, heavy and unyielding, opened into a single room dominated by a massive stone stove. He simply pointed to a corner, where a few blankets lay. "There," he grunted, the only word he offered. He then turned to his chores, chopping wood, tending to the livestock, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical. Alara, with Lily close by, began to establish a routine within the rigid boundaries he had set. She swept the dusty floor, organized the meager supplies, always under his unspoken observation. They ate in silence, the clinking of metal on tin the loudest sound, the food plain but filling. There were no explanations, no demands, just the quiet rhythm of shared space, a fragile coexistence. Alara remained guarded, her heart a closed fist, her fear still a constant companion. She had seen too much cruelty in the world to trust easily. She cleaned, she cooked, she cared for Lily, all with a quiet diligence that sought to prove her worth, even if she wasn't sure what that worth was to him. She was a survivor, not a victim, but the weight of her circumstances pressed heavily on her weary shoulders. He remained silent. She stayed. He watched them, always from a distance, through the corners of his eyes. He noticed Alara's worn-down shoes, Lily's thin dress. He left a bundle of newly tanned hides on the porch, ostensibly for mending, but he knew they would be cut for shoes. He found a small, smooth rock, polished by the creek, and left it on the windowsill where Lily often sat. He never saw her pick it up, but the next day it was gone. He repaired a loose shutter on the cabin, the hammer blows echoing in the quiet air, a deliberate sound of mending. Alara would sometimes pause her work, her eyes following his movements, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. She never thanked him, nor did he expect it. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. The help was offered, silently, a raw, suppressed gesture. One bitter evening, a biting wind howled, rattling the windows. He heard Lily cough, a small, persistent sound from their corner. He went to the barn, fetched a thick, unused horse blanket, and left it folded neatly by their sleeping spot. The next morning, it was draped over them, providing a measure of warmth against the frosty air. He saw Alara's gaze linger on him a moment longer that day, a brief, unreadable pause before she turned back to the stove. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't need to. His actions were their own language, a growing tenderness he didn't quite understand himself, a small, gentle offering in the vast, cold silence. He mended a leaky bucket, then, without a word, placed it under the dripping eave, collecting precious rainwater for her washing. He fixed the rickety fence around the small garden plot, though it was winter and nothing grew there now. These small, unobtrusive acts were his way of speaking, a silent promise whispered into the desolate landscape. He chopped extra wood, stacking it high near the cabin door, a bulwark against the relentless cold. He was always there, a solid presence like the earth itself. The first true connection began subtly, almost accidentally. A sudden, violent blizzard swept down from the mountains, trapping them indoors for days. The snow piled high against the wooden door, the only sounds the wind's shriek and the crackling fire in the stove. Lily, confined, grew restless, then feverish. Her small body trembled, her breathing shallow and unsteady. Fear, a cold, sharp blade, cut through Alara's stoic facade. She tended to her child, helpless tears silently tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. Silas watched. He saw her despair, a mirror of his own past helplessness. He didn't speak, but he went to the medicine chest, retrieved a small bottle of herbs, and, with steady hands, prepared a steaming brew. He offered it to Alara, his gaze direct, unblinking. She hesitated, then, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, took the tin cup. She administered the medicine to Lily, gently, carefully. Hours later, as the storm raged outside, Lily's fever broke. A soft sigh escaped Alara's lips. She looked at Silas, a deep, weary gratitude in her eyes, a crack in the wall of her guarded silence. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him, the first word exchanged between them that wasn't a necessity. He simply nodded, his gaze distant, as if uncomfortable with the unexpected intimacy. But something had shifted. The storm, destructive as it was, had forced them into a shared vulnerability, breaking open a hidden chamber in their hearts. The silence between them, though still present, was no longer filled with mistrust, but with a fragile, growing understanding. He had seen her fear and she, his compassion. The sound of Lily's soft breathing filled the small cabin, a gentle lullaby of survival. He felt a warmth spread through him, a thawing of the rigid cold that had encased his soul for so long. It was a faint, tentative warmth, like the first pale shoots of spring after a long, bitter winter. He swallowed. The town was preparing for its annual spring fair, a meager attempt at gaiety after the long, harsh winter. Silas, forced to ride in for supplies, found himself observing the bustling activity, a detached spectator. Alara, needing some fabric, had accompanied him, leaving Lily with a kind elderly woman near the edge of town. As they walked through the dusty square, a harsh voice sliced through the cheerful Din Bartholomew Crumpler. Surrounded by a group of jeering men, spotted Alara. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. The bought woman, ain't you?" he bellowed, his voice filled with venom. Alara froze, her shoulders stiffening, her gaze dropping to the dust. The men laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that stung her ears. Her past, which she had tried so desperately to outrun, had returned, raw and exposed. Crumpler stepped closer, his face twisted in a sneer. "Heard old Silas bought you fair and square. Still a piece of property, ain't you, girl?" The child Alara had left behind at the auction, the shame, the helplessness. It all came rushing back, a bitter tide. She felt a burning humiliation spread through her. Her chin trembled. She said nothing, enduring the barrage of insults, her silence a shield against their barbs. But she was breaking inside. Silas, who had been a few paces ahead, stopped. He turned, his body language shifting from casual observance to a solid, immovable barrier. The sounds of the fair faded into a dull roar around him, replaced by the angry thud of his own heart. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the dusty ground, placing himself squarely between Alara and the mocking crowd. His gaze, usually quiet, was now like flint, hard and unyielding. "She's with me," he said, his voice low, deliberate, cutting through the jeers. "Not bought." Chosen, the words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. The crowd, sensing the unspoken threat in his quiet demeanor, fell silent. Crumpler's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Alara looked up, her eyes wide with shock, then with a sudden rush of tears. He had defended her, claimed her not as property, but as a choice. He stayed. The sun was setting, painting the slate evening sky in hues of deep orange and purple. Silas and Alara sat on the porch, the silence between them no longer strained, but companionable, a comfortable presence. The wind rustled through the dry grass, a soft, whispering sound. Lily was asleep inside. Alara finally spoke, her voice soft, raw, like sand sifting through her fingers. "My husband, he died in the mines. Got sick. left us with nothing but debt. They took everything. She paused, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if seeing ghosts there. I tried to make it work. For Lily. But it wasn't enough. Her voice broke, a barely audible tremor. I didn't want to be bought. I just wanted a chance. Silas listened, his gaze fixed on the setting sun, his own secrets stirring within him. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, just listened. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice gruff, heavy with unspoken pain. I lost my family too. Fever swept through, took my wife, my son. Buried them myself. He gestured vaguely towards the distant hills. There's a grave on that hill. Been alone ever since. His words were few, but each one carried the weight of years of suppressed grief. Alara turned, her eyes filled with a new understanding, a shared sorrow that transcended their past. Without a word, her hand, small and trembling, reached out and gently touched his arm. It was a tentative touch, a bridge built of shared pain and growing empathy. In that quiet moment, under the vast, indifferent sky, they were no longer alone. He felt the warmth of her touch, a tender spark against the cold, rigid armor he had worn for so long. He swallowed, a lump in his throat. This connection, fragile as it was deeper than any words could convey. It was a quiet affirmation, a mutual recognition of suffering endured and dignity maintained. They were two broken pieces, beginning to mend together. Winter had long since given way to spring, and spring, in turn, blossomed into a vibrant summer. The homestead, once a place of stark solitude, now thrived with life. A small garden, meticulously tended by Alara, yielded a bounty of vegetables. Lily's laughter, a sound Silas had never imagined hearing within these walls, echoed freely, a joyful counterpoint to the creak of floorboards. He and Alara worked side by side, their movements synchronized, a silent dance of mutual support. He fixed the barn roof, she patched his worn shirts, each gesture a quiet affirmation of their growing bond. The dusty vastness outside seemed less oppressive, softened by the green shoots and the hum of insects. There were still long silences, but they were no longer empty. They were filled with unspoken understanding, with the quiet comfort of shared presence. One evening, after a particularly productive day of mending fences and preserving vegetables, they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the deep fog of the evening sky. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. He felt her warmth, the gentle weight of her trust. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was no longer alone. They were strong together, a quiet force against the world's harshness. Lily, asleep inside, was the living proof of their new beginning, the tender seed of their shared future. The homestead was no longer just a place to survive. It was a true home, built not just of logs and stone, but of forgiveness, of trust, of quiet closeness. The wind, once a symbol of loneliness, now whispered secrets of contentment through the tall grass. The future, once a bleak and uncertain road, now stretched before them, illuminated by the steady, growing light of their shared lives. Love, like the toughest prairie flowers, often grows where no one looks, in the forgotten cracks of harsh lives, nurtured by silence and suffering. It does not announce itself with grand declarations but with quiet gestures, with the shared burden of a day's labor, with the silent comfort of a hand on an arm. It is found in the weary shoulders that still carry dignity, in the tired eyes that still see hope. This is the truth of the silent rider and the resilient survivor, two souls who found home not in possession, but in profound, unspoken connection. From dust and silence grew a home, from closed hearts a family. If the story touched you, like warm light in a cold night, then carry it with you. Subscribe to our channel for more stories full of silence, courage, and genuine closeness. And tell us what moved you the most. We'll see you again, where silence means